Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar on staffing IT positions at nonprofits. We get a lot of questions from our clients and from nonprofits in general about how to find good IT staff, how to write job descriptions, how to know what staff positions you need, and when it makes sense to build an in-house IT department and when it makes sense to outsource some or all of your IT support. We also get questions about specialized IT roles and whether you must have an IT background to be able to manage nonprofit IT. So I'm excited today to moderate this question and this conversation and try to tackle all of those questions. Our learning objectives for this session are that after this session, you should be able to be familiar with typical IT descriptions and roles at nonprofits, learn typical experience and qualifications for nonprofit IT roles, understand in general when to outsource and when to build talent in-house and when to hire, and be able to describe the VCIO role pros and cons. And if you don't know what a VCIO is yet, don't worry, we're going to talk about it later. I just want to remind everyone today that Community IT is vendor agnostic. This presentation is to discuss how nonprofits are approaching staffing and outsourcing. We only make recommendations to our clients based on specific business needs. We know staffing is an often pressing need, and there are a lot of questions around it. So if that is where you are, please submit your questions and comments through the Q&A feature today. We hope we'll be giving you some good resources and links to help you out. We're going to do our best to save 10 minutes at the end to answer questions. So please put them in the Q&A tab at any time. And if you happen to be watching on YouTube right now, we encourage you to subscribe to our email list from our website. We don't send a lot of emails. We just send updates on the webinars that we offer every month so you can attend in real time and ask your questions at registration or during the webinar. And now I am happy to introduce our CEO, Johan Hammerstrom, who is joining us today. Johan?
Hi, good afternoon, Carolyn, and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO at Community IT. I've been with Community IT for about 23 years. I started off on the technical side and then moved over into management and became the CEO when we became an employee-owned company in 2015. And I've continued to spend a lot of my time talking with nonprofit organizations about their IT needs and helping them, think about the best way to use technology to accomplish their missions. And I'm grateful for all of the nonprofit organizations that we've had the privilege of working with over the years, and for all of you who are joining us today. And I'll hand it over to Nura, if you want to introduce yourself.
Okay. Thank you, Johan. Hello, everyone. My name is Nura Aboki. I'm an IT business manager and a senior consultant at Community IT. I've been at Community IT for 13 years, and I started as an entry-level tech, moved up to become an operations manager, and then later on to be a network manager and engineer, and became an IT business manager, and today I'm a senior consultant at Community IT. So I've seen that levels in my 13-year journey. Currently, I advise our clients on best practices for managing technology infrastructure. I also conduct technology assessments, develop IT plans, and build strategic IT roadmaps, including IT budgeting for our clients. So I'm very grateful to be with you and look forward to having an exciting conversation about staffing IT positions. Carolyn?
Thank you, Nura. I'm so glad you both are with us too. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm in charge of outreach at Community IT, and I'm going to be helping Johan and Nura today and monitoring the Q&A. So I'm excited to dig into this topic with you and share some of our experiences. But before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, a little bit about us. We are 100% employee-owned managed services provider. We provide outsourced IT support. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish their missions through the effective use of technology. We serve nonprofits across the United States. We've been doing this for over 20 years, and we are technology experts. We're consistently given the MSP 501 recognition for being a top MSP, which is an honor that we received again in 2022. And now we like to begin with a poll to get to know something about you after you've heard about us. One of the major factors in what kind of IT staff you need to have is the size of your organization. So I'm going to start this poll. Go ahead and launch it. You should be able to see that. You can answer. Johan, if you wouldn't mind reading the different levels that people can answer.
Oh, sure. Number one is if your organization has between 1 and 10 staff. Level 2 is if you have between 11 and 25 staff. Level 3 is if you have between 26 and 50 staff. Level 4 is between 51 and 100 staff. Level 5 is if you have over 100 staff. And if this question doesn't apply to you, you can pick option number 6.
All right, and I think just about everybody has answered. Thank you for getting those answers in. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So we had pretty even distribution. It's not really a bell curve at all. About a third, 27% in the small 1 to 10, 20% in the 11 to 25, 13% in 26 to 50, kind of medium size there. 20% in between 51 and 100, so getting larger, and 13% answered 100 plus, and one person said this doesn't really apply. So that is really good to know. Thank you all so much. And actually, we have another poll for you that I'm gonna go ahead and launch, because in addition to how large you are, there could be different, varieties across different sizes of organizations. So we also wanted to find out from you, how integral is IT to your mission and business needs? So Johan, would you mind reading again the questions that people can respond?
Sure, happy to. So level 1 is if you use IT for basic office support, you use it to send emails, print reports, but all of your business tools are online and you manage them yourselves. Level 2 is basic office support, but a little bit more. You have some business critical platforms that you need an IT expert to support, like a CRM or database, financial tools, more than what one office uses. Level 3 is if you deliver services using IT in addition to basic office support. So like if you have a charter school that's using Chromebooks, if you're a healthcare provider that has iPads, for field work. Or level 4 is if you're using IT in sort of innovative and disruptive ways, you're sort of on the cutting edge, and that IT is central to your mission and the work that you're doing. So it's kind of meant to be sort of a continuum of, how central is IT to the work and program of your organization.
Which helps us get at kind of the question of what level of IT staff you may need and what level of support, and also how comfortable as an organization you may be taking on IT roles or making IT central to your organization, or if you're more, leery of IT, maybe you don't have a lot of IT expertise on your staff, and so you need some outside assistance to run that. So I think we're just about, I'm going to give people another moment or so to answer, but I think we're at a pretty good level. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So we had a really good result on this. This one is a little bit more like a bell curve. So we had a whole bunch of people who fell in that basic office support plus. We have business critical platforms, IT supports, more than one office perhaps that need support. And that was about 71% of people on the webinar. And then a few people said that they are also delivering IT services using using IT to deliver services. So that might be, as you said, Johan, having Chromebooks in an education setting or something like that. And then one person answered that it was not applicable. All right, so thank you so much, everyone, for answering those quick questions. I think this gives us a really good feel for where people are in the attendees. We also had a bunch of questions that came in at registration, so we're going to be answering those as well. But I think, Johan, I want to turn it over to you for our first part of this discussion about IT roles and staffing.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. So we wanted to start today by talking about some of the typical IT staff roles that you might find at a nonprofit organization. These may apply to you. You know, some of the roles that we're going to talk about here may sound very familiar to you. We do appreciate everybody taking the time to answer those poll questions because one of the factors that plays into the types of IT staff roles that make sense at a nonprofit organization is the size of the organization. The larger an organization is, the more likely it is that it needs to specialize in having dedicated IT staff. And in the same way, the more central IT is to the work that the nonprofit is doing, the more likely also it is that it makes sense for the nonprofit to have dedicated IT staff. So it was very helpful to get those answers, and we'll do our best to sort of gear our comments, you know, towards the environments of the attendees of the webinar today. So we'll start with some of the roles that we see most commonly at nonprofit organizations. And maybe the best place to start is the accidental techie. That's probably a term that most of you are familiar with. If you're not, it basically means someone who did not come from a tech background, did not intend to get into technology, but through a variety of circumstances ended up having responsibility for the IT at an organization. So what kinds of things does an accidental techie take responsibility for?
Typically, a good question, Johan. And I say accidental techie, because by nature does not have that IT background, they may be interested in maybe solving their own problems and eventually able to maybe provide some end user support. So for instance, my word processing application isn't working properly. They may be able to sort of troubleshoot some basic end user issues there. That's mostly when it starts. So you have a colleague in the office that is having a problem with the web browser. You might have experienced it before as an accidental techie, and that may be something that you would want to assist your colleague on and troubleshoot. And then the word spreads in the office that, hey, that we have it wouldn't be an accidental techie, but we have someone that knows IT or that can assist. And so it starts with really the end user support. That's where we begin to see interest develops for accidental techie at a nonprofit organization.
And I think if I'm not wrong, if I'm not mistaken, that can be a very valuable role, particularly for both smaller nonprofit organizations, maybe nonprofit organizations who have staff that aren't as tech savvy. Having someone in the organization who can assist with basic IT issues can be valuable, right?
Yes, certainly. It's a role, as you mentioned, the size of the organization can benefit from having someone in-house that actually can assist, because that person is likely going to have a quick way of resolving an issue, and they may actually build a skill set, even though it's by accident, that may end up being highly valuable at the organization later, as the organization grows and consider other IT positions and roles within the organization. That accidental techie could actually lead IT at the organization eventually.
Yeah, it can become something that's a little more formalized. And in fact, I think in our experience, it's helpful to formalize that role and not just have it be, I think the term accidental comes from the fact that, like you were saying, oftentimes, and this is something that happened, over the last 10 or 15 years as IT became more common in nonprofit office environments. People would just sort of naturally gravitate towards the person who could solve their IT problems. But formalizing that responsibility, recognizing that there's a need for that in the organization, and then formally identifying the person who is responsible for that important organizational responsibility is, I think, an important part of supporting people who are in that accidental techie role.
That's exactly true, Johan.
At what point, what other things can an organization do to support their accidental techie, or at what point should they start to think about maybe getting some more professional help to assist with their IT needs?
So in the nonprofit space, fortunately, there are nonprofit organizations today that are using high-end technology because of its accessibility and affordability. There are programs there, donation programs that make this technology, new cutting-edge technology, be accessible to nonprofit organizations. So when an accidental techie within an organization begins to show potential, certainly empowering and creating the capacity for that accidental techie to take on more of the deliberate approach of learning what technologies nonprofit organizations are using that can be brought into that business or that nonprofit organization will be highly valuable. To create and be deliberate about empowering that individual or individuals at the nonprofit organization to not only be accidental techies, but to actually look at an IT role within the organization.
Yeah, it's being intentional about it, as you say, being deliberate about it is very important, and kind of recognizing that IT is a critical area of business responsibility that needs to be formalized is really important. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the management positions, which I think is often a natural evolution for somebody in an accidental techie role, is getting to the point where they maybe take on more IT management responsibilities for the organization. I did want to talk a little bit about more technical roles. So there's the accidental techie role. What are some of the entry-level positions, especially larger organizations, may find it valuable to staff?
Oftentimes we see entry-level positions start out with a title called the systems administrator. So some may frame it the IT administrator. And essentially that entry-level role is providing intentional end user support to the client or the nonprofit organization. And sometimes that IT administrator or system administrator is not just only responsible for the IT infrastructure, they may be also overseeing some of their applications that the organization may be using, information systems as well. So that is one. Another entry-level role is for larger organizations. We hear about the help desk or the IT help desk. And that is also for organizations that actually want to route or maybe might already have an IT department, and they are staffing the IT department with an IT entry-level role for help desk. Those are the first line of defense, or providing the first line support for the staff at the nonprofit organization. So those are the two popular ones that we see across nonprofit organizations.
And for me, there's usually three factors that go into deciding whether or not it makes sense to hire someone full-time to provide IT support, basic sort of entry-level IT support to the rest of the organization. One factor is the volume of support requests, which could be related to size, but not always. You could have a very large organization with not many support requests. You could have a smaller organization because of the nature of the work they do that has a high ticket volume, as we say.
Right.
But you want to make sure that the support volume is such that it justifies having one person full time. I think in general, organizations will find that it's less expensive to hire someone in-house to provide full-time help desk support than it is to outsource that function, provided that there's enough support volume to keep that person busy for that entire time. The second factor is keeping in mind that someone will need to manage that person. So, it's kind of like the free puppy, old adage. If you do hire a technical staff, keep in mind that you'll need to manage those technical staff, which is different from managing non-technical staff. And it's not that it can't be done. I mean, obviously that's, something we have a lot of experience with, but just something to keep in mind. That person will need to be managed. And also technical staff, they're seeking peer connections and relationships. They're interested in technical professional development. So there's a host of issues that go along with that, that it's important to keep in mind. And then the third is the degree to which the organization needs custom support. So if an organization has its own proprietary software package, it might make sense to bring on someone in an entry-level position to help provide support for that package. If an organization has specific customer service requirements or just wants someone who's a part of the organization to provide support to the rest of the staff, then there can also be, great value in having someone in an entry-level position. So those are kind of the three factors that I think are worth keeping in mind as organizations consider hiring into the entry level. What about more advanced technical staff? Are there times where it makes sense to create in-house positions for advanced technical work?
Yes, there are certainly opportunities for that for some organizations. Going just a little bit back to the one of the entry-level roles, a system administrator may sometimes wear the hat or may have the technical competency to actually work on advanced engineering roles. So, but having an individual wear multiple hats is not the best approach to solving some of the challenges in managing IT or providing good IT support. So some organization may want to delineate that. And especially if they are tech-heavy organizations where they are implementing a lot of projects, building applications, replacing network infrastructure upgrades, and overseeing even their, let's say, partner or volunteer databases, there may be need for a highly technical role to be brought in to manage and oversee that. So that's why we see some titles like the systems engineer, the network engineer, and some senior titles associated with those type of engineering roles.
I really appreciate your comment, Nura, about the multiple hats problem. And I think we'll come back to that on the next slide when we talk about the management roles. But the various types of technical work that need to get done in an organization and the various levels of management and planning that are required for those technical roles to be successful are very difficult to combine are very difficult to give to a single person. And if you're lucky enough to find that person, they can be hard to hold on to. And then it can be hard to replace them. So keeping the fact that, every bullet point here on this slide sort of represents a different position. And while it can be tempting to want to combine those, that can also create a lot of challenges. I think one of the things that we're seeing more and more is these, what we're calling tech adjacent roles. And it's really, sort of infrastructure adjacent roles where I think increasingly like organizations that are smaller than they once were for this are starting to add roles that are specific to the needs of that organization. So a database manager, for example, if an organization is using a database pretty heavily to do its work, reporting on data in that database, they might have someone in-house who specializes in that. If more technical, social media engagement, online marketing is something that's very central to the work that the organization is doing, they'll have someone in that role who's going to have some level of responsibility for IT. Is that something that you're seeing in the organizations that you work with as well, Nura?
Yes, the adoption of technology has spun up this certainly this tech adjacent roles. So it's very common. It's becoming popular these days, and organizations, not perfect organizations, don't want to, for instance, be left behind when there's social media and marketing campaigns. They want to be on the forefront in using technology, and they are. I've seen more deliberate approach to hiring someone that has the expertise to actually manage that aspect of their business or mission. Similarly, database manager and information manager, these are all roles that, because of the advent and adoption of new technology, cloud technology, cloud-based software as a service solutions, we are seeing dedicated tech adjacent roles. Some small organizations can get away with having overlaps, but depending on also what they do, even if you're small and you are working on tech heavy, providing a tech heavy mission to the world, certainly you may want to consider having this tech adjacent roles to help you be effective in using technology there.
Yeah. Well, let's we've got a lot to cover, and we could probably spend the whole webinar talking about these IT staff roles, but other very important roles, and something that we've seen more and more of over the last 5 to 10 years are the IT management roles at nonprofits. And I think the growing recognition that for IT to be successful, it has to be well managed. And in order for IT to be well managed, someone needs to take responsibility for that. So what, tell us a little bit about, and you, Nura, have a lot of experience in your role as an IT business manager for a number of nonprofit organizations. What are the main responsibilities of someone at the IT manager level? What is that position responsible for, and why is it important to have that someone taking care of those responsibilities at an organization?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you, Johan. Certainly in my role as an IT business manager, as the title indicates, this IT business manager role really is central to the management of the technology infrastructure of that client's network. And by that, I mean ensuring that all the aspects of the infrastructure, whether it's networking or software, end user support, is healthy and running smoothly. That is one metric that can be used to judge whether an IT manager is successful at delivering service or not. Now, an IT manager for a small organization can be just one person. Some larger organizations have multi-structure IT departments that fill in IT managers, and even maybe not a single IT manager. It could be an IT manager for infrastructure and IT manager for cybersecurity. So depending on the type of organization you have, having an IT manager own the IT infrastructure, own the information systems would be beneficial for your organization. And when I say own, they have a seat in addressing the most complex IT issues that you have. And whether they seek help with external partners or they build out an IT department to support them, it's up to that IT manager to make sure that the health of the network is at a good state. So that's primarily what I see as an IT manager. There are some day-to-day activities that we engage in, but it's in the interest of time, I would want to allow for us to talk about the other roles as well.
Yeah, and in an organization where the IT manager is, let's say, the senior most IT position in the organization, who are they typically reporting to?
Certainly the executive director or someone in the C-suite or the executive team or senior leaders at the organization, decision makers, that's the kind of interaction that we see. There's times when in that team, it could be the chief financial officer or the director of finance, but who has the listening ear and of the executive director, if the executive director isn't available. So those are the kind of top level collaboration and partnerships that we have with our clients. We are able to sit with senior leadership and to drive initiatives and to ensure that there is buy-in at that senior executive level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they might be reporting up through finance. Yeah. For large organizations, for smaller organizations, maybe it would be a director of finance. Or for larger organizations, it may be someone more senior. And I think also operations, you know, some organizations have split operations from finance.
Yes, Johan, that's also true. That operations is central to what an IT manager does. So you can find the IT manager reporting to a VP, for instance, of operations, making sure that there's good oversight and all the initiatives that the IT manager sets out, it's communicated effectively by that to that VP of operations, who has a seat at the table with the executive team. Sometimes that IT manager may also wear multiple hats. And that is where I think, Johan, it'd be interesting to hear your views on the multiple hat problem, where the IT operations manager is the IT manager. How do you reconcile?
Yeah, I think the most common version of the multiple hats problem I see with IT management is, I think organizations are trying to be resourceful and frugal, which is good, but hoping that the person in the management role can also handle the day-to-day support needs of the organization. And that is a very difficult person to try to go out and hire. What we've found is that if you hire someone who's strong technically on day-to-day support, they will end up gravitating towards that, and the management responsibilities will suffer. Or if you find someone who is strong at IT management and focuses on that, they won't have enough time to handle the day-to-day support needs. So it's important when thinking about creating or establishing these roles at your organization that you really ensure that they have the focus and the purpose of managing IT for the organization, and not trying to fill the role up with too many responsibilities that might end up coming into conflict with each other.
Thank you for sharing that, Johan.
Hey, Carolyn.
Hi, no, I just wanted to jump back in. We got a couple good questions in the chat, but we're going to save them to the end because I think that you're going to get to them. But one kind of question that's related is, while we're still talking about roles and hiring people, if you are in a situation where you have some kind of catastrophe, so a person has left, a person, there's some kind of, just issue, and you need somebody fast. Do you guys have any thoughts or ideas on like what your next step is at that point when you've identified there's a pretty big problem around your IT staff, what you do next?
Well, I think there's two answers to that question. There's the how do you plant the tree today answer, and there's the here's what you could have done to plant the tree 20 years ago answer. And I'll start with the latter, and that kind of leads into the former. So I think IT continuity is something that is vital to think about as you're working on positions and responsibilities in your organization, in the same way that you would think about financial management continuity. So if your key finance staff were to leave, how would you cover for their departure? And hopefully you would have some other resources that you could rely on that could cover for you. And you'd probably look at outsourcing, at least on an interim basis. If you had a relationship already with a financial management firm, with an accountant, the firm that's doing your audits, that you might be able to have those firms come in and provide the bridge that you need. For really large organizations, hopefully you have multiple IT staff, and the departure of a key staff person can be covered by the other staff until that position is replaced. If you don't, it just sort of, it is a good reminder of the value of establishing a partnership with an external IT support provider who knows the systems and the network and can kind of step up on short notice to provide more support. And I think in general, like if you're in the situation now, that would probably be the best move to make, is that because you'll probably be able to get someone to come in, an IT support provider to come in a little bit more quickly than you would be able to hire and staff the position, depending on how the job market is at that point in time. And then once you've established that relationship, depending on the nature of the agreement, that might be something that would add value over a long period of time and provide greater sort of continuity and stability over time. So in terms of, the IT manager role, reporting out of IT and up to someone in an operations or finance role, makes sense for a little while in the life of an organization. But at some point, because basically what you're expecting in that sort of arrangement is that the director level responsibilities, which are more around budgeting and planning and developing the long-term roadmap, that the director or vice president, whoever the IT manager is reporting to, that they're able to handle the director level responsibilities as it regards IT. That should be built into their job description if they're supervising an IT manager. And that should be a clear and acceptable expectation of the work that they're doing. At some point, whether the organization gets large enough or whether the role of IT gets important enough, that may no longer be feasible. It may not make sense at some point for someone in a finance or operations role to be responsible for IT at that director level, developing IT policies and so forth. That's the point at which you need to start thinking about creating an IT director position, because you've got enough IT responsibilities at a senior enough level that it requires its own dedicated position. We probably see that in organizations that have, or are over 100 staff, or organizations that are under 100 staff, but for whom IT is a central part of the work that they do. They're collecting data. It's like a critical, like part of their mission revolves around data collection and management. That, those are the sorts of scenarios where we see real value in having an in-house IT director position established.
Yes, I totally agree with you from recent experience, I would say. And then for the IT manager and IT director, the IT director, depending on how large the organization is, they may have an IT department that has a structure where there's a systems administrator, a network engineer, an IT manager, an IT director. So you have that chain of or hierarchy that everyone has a responsible role within the organization in terms of IT. And then the IT director does interface and work on plan, big picture thinking, planning, working on strategy for the organization. So what about the CIO role? I am seeing, what does it even mean? What is it to you, Johan?
Yeah, the CIO role, you can kind of push the analogy to the next level as you think about the CIO role. So your IT director is probably reporting to the COO VP of operations, the titling can be different depending on how the organization is structured. But ideally, the IT director is reporting to someone at an executive level who's on the senior leadership team. That person is not solely, technology is not their sole responsibility. They're probably also responsible for operations. They may be responsible for finance as well. If it makes sense for IT to be represented at the senior most level of the company as part of a portfolio of responsibilities that includes finance and operations, then you don't really need a CIO. But at some point, and again, like if technology becomes so central to the requirements of the organization that it needs to have its own unique and specific voice and representation at the senior most levels of the company, that's where it makes sense to start bringing in a CIO. Another way to think about it is how central is IT to the business strategy of the organization? Should IT be centrally incorporated into the strategic planning that the organization does? Or does the strategic planning happen and then that plan is given to IT and IT is expected to support the execution of that strategic plan through technology, which is completely valid. Both are valid ways of doing it, and it really depends on both the needs and the size of the organization. So we've worked with organizations that have several thousand staff, and in our experience, those types of organizations need to have a CIO. There's so much complexity of managing IT for thousands of people in multiple regions and multiple offices and so forth, that a CIO is vital. It can be a critical role at smaller organizations, 100 to 500 staff, but not always. I think one of the things we would caution against is, and this doesn't seem to happen as much anymore, but for a long time, we saw the CIO title being sort of given out as a incentive to keep IT staff from leaving. So an IT director may feel like I need to advance in my career, and I think it's time for me to get the CIO title. I think it's important that title be reserved for that specific situation where the IT responsibility is operating at the senior most executive level of the company, of the nonprofit.
That makes so much sense. Thank you. I want to make sure that we have time at the end for questions. So I'm going to hurry you a little bit along, but I think that's a great segue into strategy and roadmap. So.
Yes, thank you, Carolyn. So Nura, does everyone need an IT roadmap? Is that an essential?
I would say yes, but it depends. As most consultants will argue that it depends. However, in today's world, having a roadmap really gives you an idea of the types of technology solutions that you would need currently and in the future. And it gives you a way to think about all the possible growth potential of your organization, adoption of the technology itself, and how, at what point you should roll them out or introduce them to your organization. So having a roadmap, if an organization has the capacity to develop one, certainly they should go and find the capacity, or if they have the capacity to develop that IT roadmap. So to answer your question, I started with yes, it depends, but I'm back to yes, everyone should have a roadmap.
At what point should an organization reach out to an IT support company or a consultant to help them with the roadmap? At what point is this something that organizations can do on their own? And when does it make sense for them to bring in third-party support?
So to answer the latter question, bringing in a third party, the size of the organization, the need of the organization in terms of being technology heavy, they look at each of their business units or departments, and realizing that if we don't have a good handle, we're going to have every department running their technology without any guidance or direction. We want to harmonize, we want to provide some leadership in terms of the type of solutions that the organization should be rolling out. If you have departments or business units or teams using their own technology without any oversight, without any guidance, that could be very difficult to manage. So at that point in time, even before then, if you are in that bucket of organizations that are having this kind of challenge right now, reach out to an IT consultant. IT consulting companies can bring their experience to help you develop a roadmap that will address the issue, possibly assess the current IT technologies, solutions that you have in place, and work with you to ask you about your business mission, vision, goals, as well as help you develop that IT roadmap. But on the for the former, when you are if you want to develop it yourself, you must have the understanding of your business and the technical background to actually put together that roadmap, because it requires really knowing what is the next big thing, where is the industry going, what are some of the technological improvements that can help your organization achieve your mission better and more effectively. So I would say if you have the capacity, fine, but we find organizations reaching out to IT consultants because that's their space to actually bring in the experience to help build out the IT roadmap.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think what you're describing, Nura, is that IT roadmap and planning is a collaborative process, and it can't happen without the technical expertise, but it also can't happen without an understanding of what the organization needs, of the, as we like to call it, the business needs of the organization. And good IT roadmap creation and IT planning and strategy development synthesizes those two expertises. And so in terms of this last question, what skill set and background does someone need? They need both. They need both a business understanding of what the organization needs. They also need a technical understanding. And in our experience, it works well when it's a collaborative process.
That seems like a great point to go to the next slide with an example of what a roadmap might look like, so people can know it's not like 200 pages long dissertation or something about your IT strategy. It can be a pretty simple document where you put in the different, as you can see across, this is an example, an initiative, recommendation, the urgency, the complexity, and what the impact is going to have. And so then you can have more of a visual way to set your priorities and maybe talk about your budget and how you're going to do the things that need to happen. Can you go to the next slide with the when should you outsource? Because there's a couple of questions about that. So.
Yeah, well, we've tried to touch on that a little bit. About the times when it makes sense to outsource IT. So I think some rules of thumb that we have are that the smaller you are as an organization, the more cost effective it is to outsource your IT. And that's really because, as I think should be clear from looking at the position slide, there are a wide range of expertises that are required in order for IT to be successful. There's IT management expertise, there's technical expertise at both a basic as well as an advanced technical level. And it's just very hard to create that expertise in a scalable way inside the organization. So for smaller organizations, the ideal arrangement is you have an accidental techie who is familiar enough with IT that they can manage the support relationship and hold the vendor accountable, but that they're not really expected to do most of the work themselves, and the outsourced provider is able to provide that work in a in a really scalable way. And then as organizations start to get larger, once the 100 is sort of a magic tipping point for organizations where they move from being what we call SMB, small and medium-sized businesses, into what's known as the mid-market. And there's just sort of a fundamental change that happens in the nature of organizations at that size. They just take on greater complexity, and that is reflected in their IT needs. And it can start to become challenging to meet those greater complexities effectively solely through an outsourced provider. So somewhere on that journey, somewhere between 10 and 100, you're starting to create in-house IT capacity. And I think ideally you're doing it in a way as an organization that is closely aligned with your strategic plan and your fundamental needs to accomplish your mission.
That's a great answer. And I think because we do have a couple of good questions in the Q&A, I'm going to ask you to skip the next slide. And if we have time, we'll come back to talk about the VCIO, because I promised everyone earlier on that we would talk about it. And I know you have some opinions. But so our first question in the Q&A was, our accidental techie does not have the expertise to continue in this direction, but we do not have a big enough or consistent enough need to hire a tech employee. So what is the next best step? And I kind of feel like you just maybe had mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the size, I think outsourcing makes the most sense. And if that's something that the accidental techie is on board with and supportive of, then they will gladly welcome that, and they can actually be ideally given a lead responsibility in identifying and helping to onboard the outsourced provider.
And so then does that accidental techie, whatever their role actually is or their job description, like often the person who is, kind of maintaining that relationship or hiring the outsourced IT support would be like the CFO or some other director. So then the accidental techie is kind of an intermediary. Is that how it can work?
Yeah, what we actually what we prefer in our engagements is that there be kind of 2 points of contact. There's the day-to-day point of contact, the person who's interfacing directly with the IT business manager, or, if it's good to have somebody within the organization whose staff can go to if they're running into any issues, if they have questions. Oh, I forgot, who do I call to get help? That sort of thing. And especially if the accidental techie has skills to handle really basic and simple technical needs, they can continue to resolve those if they have time to do it in their workload. And then you would have sort of the business point of contact, the person who's managing the contract and the relationship, and maybe is engaged in occasional long-term planning discussions as well.
Yes, that's really more effective, as you mentioned, Johan, having someone to help with that planning and collaborate on any strategic IT roadmaps that they would be interested in building. So those 2 tiers, I've seen those as a win-win situation rather than just having someone that's not really engaging with the outsourced IT company.
That is a great segue into the next question, which is, I'm a couple of years into working at a nonprofit, and there's a big difference between leadership prioritizing IT in comparison with corporate. However, what guidance do you have to help gain support from leadership on the importance of IT and prioritizing vital projects for organizational improvement? I feel like this could be its own webinar, but if you have a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, this is a question that comes up a lot, and there's, part of it is, how do you influence leadership at your organization? And that's different for every organization. And that's kind of a universal challenge. Like, figuring out how to manage up is something that is needed in all different areas, not just IT. So I won't weigh in on sort of the specifics of that, because it varies widely from organization to organization. I do think that when it comes to IT, one of the big challenges, or one of the things you can do, is demystify it. So I think oftentimes senior leadership doesn't understand IT, or they feel like it's all technical and it's confusing, and maybe it frightens them, it makes them feel inadequate as leaders potentially. So the more you can do to demystify IT and get out of the jargon, I'm a firm believer that every IT concept can be explained in a way that anybody can understand it and can be connected to the priorities that your leaders have for the organization. And so that's really the challenge. You should work with an IT support provider who's able to assist you with that process. Don't let them talk to you in jargon. Don't let them hide behind technical concepts. They should be able to explain everything that was on that roadmap slide should connect back to a business priority. And if you can frame those needs in terms of business priorities, you might have more luck with your leadership. Not a guarantee, because of those sort of the unique factors, that we all know exist in every organization.
That's a great answer. I want to make sure we get to the slide with the next webinar, which I think is the next one. So if I can invite everyone back. We are taking the month off in December with our webinars. We hope all of your holiday galas are wonderful and your fundraising goals are met. And our next webinar will be our traditional tech trends roundtable, which is always one of our most popular webinars. And we're splitting it into 2 parts. In January, our panel of our executives and experts will be taking your questions and discussing tech trends that every nonprofit needs to know about. So we'll talk about the way our offices work now, cybersecurity, and just some basics that we expect to continue shaping our sector. And really every nonprofit, no matter how tech savvy you are or not tech savvy you are, you need to have these fundamentals in place and understand how these trends are working. And as we usually do, we're also going to look back on our predictions from 2022 and see what came true, which is always a fun exercise. And Johan, you'll be returning, and our other experts, Matt and Eshelman on cybersecurity, and Steve Longenecker on cloud computing, will be talking about those aspects of modern offices. And in February, for part 2, we're going to branch out and talk a little bit more about what's on the horizon or already arriving that nonprofits can be thinking about, what trends we see shaping the next 3 to 5 years, how you can maximize your investments, gear up your IT roadmap toward those emerging best practices and tools. And this is such a good, packed and informative webinar, so we split it into 2 parts. And I think, Nura, you're coming back for February, and Johan, you are as well. So those are going to be on January 18th at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. The one in February will be on the 15th. I think I can read through our learning objectives, which we didn't quite have time to hit the last one about the virtual CIO, but I hope that you're all familiar with typical IT job descriptions and roles. You learned about some of the experience and qualifications. If you need more information about that, we have a couple of resources I'm going to share in the transcript for this. Understanding in general when to outsource, when to build your talent in-house, when to hire, finding, as we said, and I put in the photo, the unicorns, the people who can do the technology and the management and strategy. It's really hard to find those people. So as Johan said, sometimes you just need to find an outsourced partner that's going to learn your business over time with you and be able to be a trusted resource to you around that. I want to thank you, Johan and Nura, so much for being with us today and sharing your years of experience on this. I want to thank everybody who attended. Thank you for spending an hour with us to learn about this. And I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.